I just want to take a few minutes to go through looking at a chest stand, a chin stand, and a chin roll. Now these are very advanced skills, and often teachers or parents send me photos and videos of people doing them going, is this safe for my child to do? Now, in 99% of the time, the videos and images that are sent through make me cringe. They are done extremely poorly. However, with any skill, there are actually safe ways of doing it that it's kind of been bastardized from initially. So I want to go through the safest ways of doing this, if it is appropriate for this person's practice, and then the issues with how it's been taken out of context. So first of all, we're going to look at a yogic chin stand. Now, in this situation, there should be very little pressure on the chin. We need to make sure we've got a huge amount of thoracic extension. The chin should actually be lifted or very, very, very lightly touching the ground. Also, the hands will be placed and there's pressure through the hands in order to actually lift the chest slightly off the floor. It's actually a suspended position. It requires an enormous amount of upper back extension, an enormous amount of shoulder stability and strength through the shoulder girdle. So this is something that we need to look at very, very carefully if we're going to include it in training, and it should be a very slow and gradual progression. Keep in mind, very little pressure on the chin and chest is actually floating off the floor. In a rhythmic gym chest stand, what we're looking at is actually the breastbone will be touching the ground. The chin should not be touching the ground. And if you see an image of somebody or a footage of somebody doing this well, they're actually balanced, they're very open, the tips of the shoulders will be off the floor, the chin is off the floor, they've got a smooth extension through the spine and the feet are elevated. We don't want to see any hinging in the low back. As we've talked about, this can lead to a lot of instability, but if you have enough mobility and control, I'm actually not too fussed about that version either. I do want to stress the importance of going into it carefully. If they're going into it and they have the risk of rolling over the chin, not great. The worst version is the one that has been bastardized and taken out of context. So this is the version that you'll see in your contortion, solos, and of people who've learnt it from various dubious sources, where they will take the entire body over. Often they'll rest their bottom on their head. Their chin is fully extended and very, very loaded. I'm actually going to take his skull off in a moment and show what's wrong with this position. This is bad enough. Even worse is if they actively roll over the neck in that position. This is not a weight-bearing position for our body, and I'm going to explain the anatomy of this in a lot of detail. Unfortunately, the anatomy in this area is not the same from person to person. So you may have had students do it for years with no worries. However, there are some anatomical anomalies that can make this extraordinarily dangerous for some people. The people we need to be really cautious about are those who are hypermobile, especially if there's any sign of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or any other connective tissue disorder where the tissues and ligaments are really floppy. The other group that we need to be very careful of is anyone with Down syndrome or chromosomal issues, because there's actually a much higher incidence of either a missing or a really lax ligament at the top of your neck that I want you to see in detail. So if we take off our head, which you often don't do during the day, yep, super. So if we take this skull off and we look down the barrel of the spine, now, to keep this spine model together, they actually stick them together. But normally we have this little ring and the dens of C2, this kind of pokey bone sticks up in between. We have a ligament that helps hold this in place. Yep. Most people, it's reasonably stable. If you're a little bit more hypermobile, it's going to be a bit more hypermobile. Ideally, if you're normal, there should, as an adult, there should be no more than 3 millimeters distance here. As a child, it may be up to 5 millimeters. However, some people, this ligament is really stretchy and this can shift a lot more, so that when they go into a full extension, the circular bone moves forward. Relatively, this means that this bone sinks back The trouble is you have your spinal cord right here. So you can get pressure of this dens, this sticky point of bone into the top of your spinal cord. Not optimal. Unfortunately, you can't tell who has an issue with this ligament unless they have a CT or an MRI, which you're not going to do on a group of young students. So I highly, highly, highly recommend against any kind of chin stand, chest stand, chin roll in any population, especially recreational dancers. If people are wanting to do it, if you're an Olympic level rhythmic gymnast, you want to make sure you're aiming towards having very, very, very little pressure or no pressure on the chin, and we're actually aiming to get that full upper body extension and spinal mobility and control so that it's taken through areas where we actually can have some support. It's just too great a risk to have everyone or anyone going into this position unless they have had an MRI or CT, and even then it's not a great position to go into. So I hope that helps explain why I get such a visceral reaction when I see especially recreational students or even elite level kids doing this. The risk of serious injury in this kind of movement is just far greater than I think anyone really wants to take on if they're training students. So please educate your students, educate the parents of your students to make sure that they're not doing it at home, and really work towards being able to get range through the rest of the body so that no force and no load is going through the chin in any one of these skills.